IP. It's kind of sad. But on to happier news. There's new Naxxramas speedrun rules, and I'm so happy we have you on this week, Dally, to kind of like let us know what these are all about because it looks like so they basically just said straight up the world buff in Silithist is just no go. If you have it, your parse and your guild's run just gets thrown out.
Basically, like your run never existed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So was that something you guys were planning on, or
uh,
probably
no, no,
right?
no, it wasn't. Honestly, it's funny because the vast majority of the speedrunning and parsing community seems to be in favor of that change, and Onslaught was the notable, I guess, the notable detractors against that rule. I mean, we've always been in favor of doing literally whatever it takes to maximize like any advantage we can possibly get. So, yeah, I've talked about this plenty of times on my stream. How, in my opinion, if you're trying to go as hard as possible and you're trying to set records, like if it's in the game, it should be on the table. But I mean, the reason they did it is because on really populated, heavily contested PvP servers, getting that buff is extremely griefable. So if you're trying to get world buffs, it's only a 30-minute buff, so you have to get it last after every single other buff, and you have to go to Silithus, and there's only one spot you can get the buff, like, or you can turn it in. So it makes it easy to grief with like the spells or just getting ganked there. So I know why they did it. Personally, I'm not super happy that they did it, just because for me, I'm a simple person. I'm the type of person who's just like, if I can get a buff to make my numbers bigger, I'm gonna get it. But it hasn't stopped me. Like, outside of at least speedruns, I'm still getting it every week anyways. I don't really care what my Warcraft logs parses are anyways.
Now that you mention it, you are on Scarum, so it would be much easier to get probably. You should
Admittedly,
have
yes.
those little like guerrilla bands of rogues that might jump you, but if you guys did it together, it'd probably be fairly easy.
Yeah,
It's kind of
I mean,
interesting. I think this is about accessibility, right? Like, are they removing it just because it's like very inaccessible to some people, so it's a little more competitive? Like, how far down the line is like accessibility something that people need to keep in mind? Because there have been weeks where like we can't get Dark Moon Fair buffs at all just because it's griefed nonstop, and there's almost nothing we can do about it. So I guess it's kind of interesting that they're removing it for accessibility reasons.
right. To me, that's one of the biggest reasons as to why it doesn't make sense. Like, why this one and not something like getting Darkmoon Fair, exactly, or when Alliance try to get the War Chief's Blessing. That's
Yeah.
equally as painful. You got to get mind controlled in Orgrimmar when the buff goes out. I mean, that's about the ultimate inconvenience right there. Yet that one's perfectly allowed. So yeah, there's a lot of conspiracy theories you can come up with as to why they singled out this one specifically. But at this point, it is what it is. So there's not much point in whining about it anymore.
I've heard there's a way to get summoned underneath Orgrimmar as a alliance and be able to get the buff from
Orgrimmar?
underneath Orgrimmar. Sorry.
Not just under.
No.
You'd be shocked at how many amazing creative places people have found to go to Orgrimmar. The people go to like the inaccessible parts, like way up high, like on the roof, and then people go into like the uninstanced version of Ragefire Chasm. That's still technically in Orgrimmar. People go under. Yeah, people find crazy places because at least on like super contested populated servers, there's dedicated people to just trying to kill alliance that are trying to get that buff, and so it's just like this game of cat and mouse where people are constantly trying to find new spots to hide from the people that are trying to find them.
It doesn't really surprise me when you see where people are getting summoned to at raids. Sometimes, like with AQ and Nax, people are just like underneath places and they're up top places. So it doesn't surprise me they're finding insane places to get summoned in Orgrimmar.
Yeah,
Every
exactly.
time we go
But getting
to
that buff is
Nax,
fine.
Yeah.
That one's
Yeah.
easy, but
That
still,
one's okay,
it's
right?
just way too difficult.
Yeah, every time we zone into Nax, there's literally 30 horde underneath Nax, like underneath the platform. And I assume they're summoning people there, and the horde just have to jump up and they zone in. But
Yeah.
every time they're there, and I haven't really researched into why they're underneath the platform, but I assume that that's what they're doing.
So
Yeah.
next time, Bob, just like walk around, like go check it out, see what's going on.
Oh yeah.
No, yeah,
Usually
they're
I'm
underneath.
sweating as I get in there. I'm like, okay, charge in on this guy, then intercept the guy right by the door, then walk in. Okay, I made it.
Yeah, where they summon underneath though, you just have to like jump and you'll instance in. So it's like perfectly safe to be summoned underneath like that. That's why people do it.
I mean, I would do it if I could, but it looks like it's horde dominated on our server. They're like controlling that area pretty hardcore.
Yeah, that's like an interesting big problem with that sort of thing. Like with AQ, we had to be summoned on like a different up top spot from the horde so that they couldn't just grief us every time. So it's kind of funny.
This is why we hate Horde.
I don't really, but
Look how beautiful the Barrens is. I don't hate horde.
okay. So the second one is they said that Soul Revival, which is the buff you get when you kill a shard in the Scourge in Evasion, you get like a 10% damage buff. They said it cannot be used in conjunction with the Dark Moon Fair buffs. So this really doesn't really matter now because it's over. But I guess people could have raid logged somebody for a week or two with that buff and waited for the Dark Moon Fair buff. So I guess that's why they put this in here. But
Who would possibly be hardcore enough to do something like that?
was that something you were doing?
I might have a warrior currently sitting offline with DMF and Soul Revival, yes.
Oh man.
Oh, that's awesome. Gosh, man, that's awesome. Well,
That is a lot. That's like almost unfathomable to normal players who like we can't get our guild to get Dark Moon Fair buff on like Sunday and save it for Tuesday raid.
when it's in Goldshire.
When it's in Goldshire too, yeah.
It's like, come on, guys, come on. Oh, man. All right, so the third one is rebuffing world buffs. Basically just isn't allowed. Was that something you guys had done before or you knew about people doing it? Is that like a common practice?
Well, it's something we actually did for our progression run initially, but it's never really been an issue, or at least as much of an issue in previous speedrun like this previous speedrun tiers. People started doing it at the very, very end of the AQ speedrunning era, but besides that, it hasn't really. There's not been much reason to do it. But in Naxx specifically, Naxx is unique in that every time you do a wing, you go back to the start. So previously people didn't bother because if you swap out people, it means like you have to have new people zone in and run all the way to catch up to the raid, and you're just going to lose time doing it. But with Naxx, like if you finish a wing, you can just have, if you wanted to swap three people can pour it out, and three new people could just pour it in right at the entrance, just where everyone else is, and you could keep on your merry way. So the reason why you'd want to do that would be specifically for the Frostwing, because like we were talking about before, it's advantageous sometimes to bring extra healers for Saffron and sometimes extra like range DPS for KT. So they did this basically to prevent excessive swapping. To make it, once again, I think it's just like another accessibility thing, just like to allow guilds who don't necessarily have a guild full of healer alts or a guild full of 20 extra healers just on demand, ready to go. So once again, I'm a type of person that's fine with just doing whatever goes to try to like get something like as good of a speed run time as possible. But I didn't have strong feelings on this one. So if anything, it just means it's easier to follow just a set roster of 40 people, and it doesn't overcomplicate things.
Maybe they should push the no world buff speed runs a little more, instead of just removing what you can do with world buffs. If it was a little more popular to do the non-world buff speed runs, doesn't that just like open up accessibility to everybody then?
Well, they have a section for no world buffs, but I mean, I think one of the biggest appeals for both doing and watching speedruns, from what I've noticed at least, is people really enjoy seeing you do a bunch of really, really cool stuff in game that wouldn't normally be done in a regular run. Like people enjoy seeing like really, really cool strats and people killing stuff insanely fast. And a lot of that stuff really isn't possible unless you do have world buffs. So,
well, and it adds an extra layer of just, for me personally, anybody who's taken the time to get a lot of world buffs and have really like put their hat in that ring and then lost them early on and stuff like that, watching really good guilds with these buffs adds tension, adds drama, adds anxiety, and like you're on the edge of your seat, you're like, oh, you almost died, and if that wasn't there, you probably could do speed runs pretty easily just getting reses up. I mean, a wipe really wouldn't completely kill your chances at a really good run, whereas with the world buffs, like if you wipe, I mean, the speed run's over, and so that's kind of exciting. It makes it gives it that, whoo, so
Right. It adds stakes. Like it makes
Yeah.
dying that much more important. It's not just like, oh, just res me, whatever, it'll be fun. Yeah, all of a sudden if you die, you've kind of basically lost the game for the night as an
Yeah.
individual player at least.
yeah.
Nothing's more stressful than being a healer when we were trying to get down patchwork and knowing that nobody could die until we got to patchwork. Like just
Oh yeah.
watching stupid people just get to like 5% health and you're like, no.
Yeah,
Or-
our melee is not fapping is like our
Or people
the
dying
main.
to the little
The
slimes
healers
that come
suck.
out. It's like, just don't touch it. Just run away.
Literally, just walk away.
Oh,
Really
it's
easy
so
ways
funny.
to die on the stuff before patchwork, but yeah, like how insanely effective they are for patchwork, it makes it always the adventure. I mean, even for us every week, it's still you're kind of holding your breath, making sure that people don't die to dumb stuff until you get there.
Right.
Yeah. Like I love Nax as a raid, but there are parts that I don't enjoy just because I'm nervous the whole time. Like getting to patchwork, I'm like, all right, make sure I fat, make sure I have aggro on this. I don't want them to like run into the healers. Like there are so many instances like that happen to us that I'm on edge the whole time.
Yep. All right, so the next one is failing trash requirements or using more than 5 flasks of petrification. So the trash requirements will be in what we link in the show notes. It's like a certain amount of golems, certain amount of slimes, blah blah blah. But specifically, what I'm interested in is the flask of petrification part. It talks about being able to skip mobs or skip packs. Like, how does that work? Like, if the whole raid drinks them, do the mobs just de-aggro or something? I'm confused.
Yeah, well, it's not the aggro, but it's similar to what something like a hunter could do or a rogue could do, where if a hunter pulls a bunch of stuff, if they're doing if they're trying to solo a tribute run, for example, they can pull a bunch of stuff, uh, bring them off into some corner, everybody else can run by, and then the hunter feign deaths, and then the
Oh.
mobs just reset. So petrification, it's rogue can do something similar, where if like you gather up a ton of mobs and then you flask a petrification, all the mobs will just keep attacking that one rogue who's petrified. And for those that don't know, it just makes you basically unkillable for 1 minute straight. Uh, and then everybody could just run by the stuff, and the rogue could just vanish after the petrification ends, and you just continue along your merry way. Now, it's not really so much for skips they put in that they implemented that rule, because with the trash requirements, you can't really skip all that much stuff anyways. The reason why petrification is really powerful, it's for a couple of reasons. First of all, like petrification, not only when you use it, not only does it make you like invulnerable, but it also drops any sort of, well, not any, but a lot of harmful debuffs that might otherwise kill you. So, like for example, when you're doing Plague Wing, you're doing the gargoyles that give you the
Gargoyles.
stacking thing. Yeah, if you pop a flask of petrification, you instantly get rid of all the debuffs you had. So if you got up to a dangerous amount of stacks, in theory, you could just pop your flask of petrification and you're good to go. So they basically implemented it to allow to make it so you couldn't just easily have the entire raid cheese a lot of mechanics by skipping them by just popping that flask. And then the other thing, but they're still allowing some, because what a lot of people did in the previous speedrunning tiers was they would use petrification flasks to gather up a bunch of mobs in one spot, kind of like how you were going to skip a bunch of mobs, but instead of skipping them, you would just have the entire rest of the raid come in when you've got a bazillion mobs just clumped up in one spot, and you would AoE them all down at the same time. So like that's what a lot of guilds did in AQ when they were speedrunning, like all the trash before Huhuron. They would gather up 4 or 5, sometimes just all 6 of the packs in like one giant ball, and then everybody would run in and just sapper them all at the same time and kill them. So um, there was
Just
a lot of debate on these rules as to how many should be allowed coming into Naxxramas. And some people were saying 0. Some people, myself included, said an unlimited amount, like any amount flies. But they eventually settled on the 5 that they went with.
I mean, with the amount of gold in the game, like, we could count on the big guilds to gold sink the gold, wouldn't be that bad, but so does that make you completely invulnerable? Like, because I saw something where it might have been you guys were swimming underneath something through the slime to skip something. Like, the slime that does all the damage, you guys were like, or I don't know if it was you or not, but it was somebody swimming underneath at one point in Nax and then coming out on the other side. And I didn't even know that was a thing until I saw it.
Well, you can't.
We didn't do it. We actually were planning to do it for our progression run, but then we realized that it wasn't actually really something that was going to save us time. But the slime inside of Next, it doesn't kill you. It reduces your health to a certain amount. Like I think it cuts your health down to like 30% or something of your real health. And then it's like a slow dot over time. But you can actually swim through it for a couple minutes straight before it's actually enough damage to kill you. So that's not
I've
really what
never
it was.
stood in it long enough to find that out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
petrification also freezes you, so you're stuck after you use it.
Oh.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
it. You can't
so you
actually
can't
move.
just like be invincible and run around like you have a paladin bubble.
It's kind of like an ice block that lasts for a minute, basically.
Okay. Well, thank you for clearing that up. All right, so the next one is there will be a 5-minute penalty to your speed run time for each swap you make in the raid. So this basically just makes it so you just can't swap anybody. Like this further makes it so you're going to just keep 40 characters, right?
Effectively, yeah. I mean, this only really affects speedrunning. This means that if all you care about is your damage parse on Warcraft logs, you can still swap people out because you don't really care what your overall clear time is. But this is a de facto ban on making any swaps because no one character swap will ever save you 5 minutes in a speedrun. So exactly. Because technically you're allowed to swap up to 50. I guess that's going to be the next rule. But like they technically still allow swaps, but in reality, like nobody's is ever going to deem it worth it.
Yeah, you're gonna just
just
you're gonna have the longest speed run possible because of it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean maybe if it was a minute penalty or something, but 5 minutes seems like a substantial amount to basically just not make it worth it.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's no mechanics in the game that can save you 5 minutes if you have one different player instead of one other. So if they're trying to prevent swaps, which is something we talked about earlier, then that's basically the way you do it.
Yeah. It'd be kind of neat to see if you could have like one infinite swap where you could take as many people as you want one time, but I guess it would be kind of hard to track that swap. I don't know. I guess that would just further complicate it, and looks like the whole point of this is to not complicate it. All right, so the last rule is with the rules around rebuffing in place, the timeout for complete raids will be raised to 2 hours, up from 1 hour. There was like a speedrunning top time or something where you couldn't.
I think it's like timeout. Like we're pausing. Is that what it is?
This one's confusing. Unless you already kind of know what they're talking about here, it's kind of hard for a person to just read that and know what they're talking about. Basically, what that's saying is right now they had a timeout in place where if you spend longer, at least when you zoned in, like from when you killed the first boss to when you killed the last boss, if you took too long of a period of time, they would disqualify your log. So essentially what this is saying
logging out for 3-minute buffs.
Exactly. You can't log out in between bosses because, like, in theory, if you wanted to go with the ultimate cheese, you could kill one boss and have all your warriors pop Recklessness and then log out for 30 minutes and then log back in 30 minutes later, do another boss with Recklessness and do the entire thing. So they're basically just preventing you from cheesing the parses by logging off like that. And the reason they raised it up to 2 hours instead of 1 hour is no raid up to this point, at least for the guilds that like the top guilds, no raid up to this point has taken more than an hour. So if you come into BWL, for example, you can start and finish with Songflower without ever having to worry about it falling off. But like next, if you're going at even like a reasonable pace, by the time you get to Saffron, chances are your hour long buffs are gone now. So what they're saying is there was a rule earlier saying you couldn't go out of Nax, get new world buffs, and then come back in to continue like doing the rest of the raid with the 1 hour buffs like Songflower and Ren buffs. So now they're saying like the grace period, since you're not allowed to rebuff like that anymore, is up to 2 hours just to make sure that you still have you can still have your original 2 hour buffs like Ani and ZG buff, like stuff like that.
So it would kind of make sense to still, like, say between Hygen and Lotheb, maybe log out for 2 minutes to get your 3-minute buffs back. That might make sense, right? Because you can do that within this time scale.
Yeah, for sure. If you, as long as you're not worried about your raid being more than like I guess if you know your raid's gonna be an hour and 59 minutes long and you log out for 2 extra minutes, then I guess you might get screwed. But otherwise, then yeah, you can. It still allows like reasonable log offs for like real legit reasons, just like basically to prevent cheesing.
Cool.
Makes sense.
All right, well, dude, it was so nice to have you on for this bit of news because we would not have been able to cover it nearly as well. Like